All right, hello everyone. It's Boston and Moon here together, and we're pleased to be joined by Xalavier Nelson Jr. How are you? How are you doing today?
I am tired, alive, and grateful to be here.
I've a sick kid at home today, so I'm very much the same. Um, so we're here to talk about kind of Xalavier yourself. Strange Scaffold is a studio. We recently played on our game club series. We recently played Clickolding, so sort of want to get into that, and then we'll wrap up with some hopefully fun, very quick lightning round questions. So at the to sort of intro us here, can you tell our listeners here that maybe aren't familiar with you and familiar with Strange Scaffold a little bit about yourself and a little bit about the studio itself?
Yeah, so my name is Xalavier Nelson Jr. I've worked on about 100 games at this point in the past 8 years. I've been in the industry for 14 years, and my experience spans AAA, indie, original games, licensed IP, everything from Magic the Gathering to an airport for aliens currently run by dogs. So the idea of having a very holistic picture over the past roughly decade now of what it means to make a game and search for ways to make games better, faster, cheaper, and healthier than the industry assumes is possible has become my entire thing. And that's the foundation of Strange Scaffold. We started the studio about 15 years ago. 5 years ago. We've released 15 games in that time, the latest of which is I Am Your Beast. And it's a really good validator of all the things we said about it being possible to make games differently than a lot of the everything is on fire ways that you see it now. And that little beacon of sanity has been useful for me, at least, as I continue to see more and more of what the industry has to offer.
Right. The first... Oh, go ahead.
Out of curiosity, is it a particular, like, when you created Strange Scaffold, was it a workflow idea? Is it a process? How exactly did you come up with the groundwork to lay that sustainable development down? Like, is it rules that you set for everybody? Do you break them yourself occasionally, kind of thing? Because I know what that's like.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'd say that a lot of the foundation of Strange Scaffold was... because it was just me at the start, and at the end of the day, I'm the creative director, multiple hats wearer, studio head. The place where it emanates from is this idea that, man, there's all these ways that we talk about what it means to make a video game, and what it means to make that sustainably, what it means to make high quality things consistently. And looking at those statements as just logical arguments, a lot of them don't make sense. Like, you can't know what game you're making until you make it, is a great philosophical point. But for a project that's supposed to arrive at a time, at a budget, so you can make your next project, that doesn't make a lot of sense. The idea that a creative director and a producer have to be at odds to find the best solution in the middle doesn't make sense. The fact that you can't, the idea that people present as fact that you can't make a game on time and on budget, like that's the exception rather than the rule, doesn't make fundamental sense, especially when we've been doing this for 50 years, unless you just take for granted that game production and reasonability of development cycle is at odds with the player experience. And as I've attempted to prove with Strange Scaffold and a lot of the environments where I've had the opportunity to contribute to development cycles, that just isn't the case. And the more I see, the more I, especially at the early stage of Strange Scaffold, am very grateful that I had these principles I set. I just knew how my brain worked. I knew what I wanted out of a development cycle. I knew the type of life I wanted to live. And I just, like a game design problem, said, how do you set up a system of factors and collaborators and relationships that facilitate that thing? How do you build a factory to produce the square or the circle or the triangle? And I built that factory, and I've been had the opportunity to have a lot of people collaborate on refining it over time. And the process has just shown me that is a very doable thing that more people can and should have. And a lot of the cultural factors in games and how we talk about them especially in the development side, are obstacles to that more refined, more consistent future on the behalf of our players.
So what would you say for sustainable development? What are the kind of the core tenets of that development? Like what are your kind of core driving forces to say, I want to make these games, but I want to make sure we make them in the healthiest way we can possible, and like you said, on time and on budget as much as we can?
Health as an individual consideration is the first thing that I've really locked into my head. There are some people who they want to work 80 hours, 1 week, cram a bunch of stuff in, and then have a space for their brain to rest or to like noodle with their project, percolate on the next cycle, and then spend another 80 hours with frantic creativity. There is a version of that is healthy and that is sustainable and that is especially transparent to the entire team so people can opt into whether they want to work with that. But the idea of games being art and tech, having individual artistic process that results in specific games is a deeply under-discussed piece of our medium, I think. So, yeah, I think the first principle that I come at it from, at least, is health is individual. For me, especially being neurodivergent, if I was locked in a room with one game for 5 years, I would die. I just don't know how people, even just for like the existential risk to your livelihood, I don't know how people do it. So I didn't make my studio to make games like that. And you'd be surprised how often I talk to people all the time, dozens a year. They're 20-year veterans who are looking for their next move. They're students who are just getting out of college, wondering if they even want to join the games industry. I make time for people, I chat to them, and you'd be surprised how often I talk to someone and I'm like, so how do you work? Like, how does your brain work? Do you know? And they go like, oh, well, I really don't like to like talk to people or like interact with fans like personally. But I really want to like make good games for players. And I was like, that's great. Cool. What's your idea for your project? They're like, I'm going to make an early access project that is highly dependent on interaction with the community and community feedback. And I was like, did you listen to yourself?
To yourself?
Are you the person who's supposed to talk to those people?
Right.
Because if it is, you have created a self-destructive organism from the start. And so, yeah, Strange Scaffold makes multiple projects at one time because that's the healthiest place for me to emerge from to do my best work for players.
Right.
That might be the three most powerful words I've heard in not just game dev, but work life cycle period. Health is individual. Because I work in an office 9 to 5 essentially, but I'm a night person. So like you don't talk to me until about 2 p.m. Then I start being talkative, and that's when I get most of my stuff done is 2 p.m. through till 5. Everybody who knows me now knows that, but it takes some time before you start to, click those gears with everybody who works with you and around you. Sometimes you're just not a morning person, and that can be very difficult. Sometimes you're not a night person, and the morning is the more important thing. I don't think I've ever... It's 3 simple words, and I've never heard it put so succinctly and so accurately, ever.
Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, and again, this is why I come from the position in game dev where people have, to a degree, so much individual agency, especially on the indie side. I talk to people who are night people, and they tell me that they are setting up their studio schedule and they have stand-ups at 9 a.m. every day. And I'm like, what? Do you hate yourself? That doesn't make sense. You get to set the schedule. Set it for noon. That is a factor you can, and to a degree, might need to build your studio around for the best results for your players. And for an industry that is all the time getting surprised by what the next big game is or could be, we sure are dogmatic that we know exactly how to make video games. Don't ask us questions about how to make video games. We know how to do that. But for everything else, we're a young medium. We don't know.
Right. Moon, do you want to ask this next question?
You've been pretty open. You've mentioned recently on X/Twitter. You've talked about it on the remap shows that you've been on and Waypoint before that. You've had tough times with Strange Scaffold, and there's been closed doors in the future kind of moments, but you've done what it needed to be done. I think you mentioned on, I think it was one of the Waypoint episodes, that you did everything. You're like, okay, I'm going to do contract work, I'm going to do voiceover work, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, anything I can do to keep the doors open. Like, that can be really tough, but then what's the flip side of that as well? Like, what is it like when, from everything I'm seeing, I'm Your Beast seems to be hitting really, really well and really hard at the moment? And does it pay off for yourself when it's like, tough times are here, we made it through, and now, not great times, but decent to good times are here, so we're okay for a little bit now? Like, how does that affect you as the person who is essentially responsible for everything?
I think the biggest thing that it passes on to me is a perspective that prioritizes like having a long-term vision and sticking to it. When you come off of the back of a game like I Am Your Beast, we still have a 99% Steam rating right now with thousands of Steam reviews. Really well-received game. People are calling it a Game of the Year contender. I'm surprised and honored and grateful, and I'm so proud of the team and what they've done to put it there. Folks like Dan Pierce. One of the things that's very easy to do because of how games typically work is say, I'm Your Beast 2. It's double the length. It's it's triple the content, more variety, more everything. And you take that to a publisher, and a publisher will, even though we actually have statistics that in indie games suggest that a indie game sequel tends to perform less well than its predecessor on average because part of the appeal of an indie game is novelty. A publisher will say, well, people loved this one. You're going to do 3 times the amount of stuff. You're going to take 4 times the amount of time on it. That's a hit. That's a blockbuster. And I think my responsibility as a creator, and one of the things I'm afforded having not been allowed to buy into survivorship bias, I simply have a better strategy, therefore everything will work, is to just retain the pragmatism. So like, we had the same consideration after El Paso Elsewhere. El Paso Elsewhere performed really well. It was nominated for Giant Awards alongside games that had much more marketing power and dev time and spend behind them.
I will say, like, hands up for myself here. I'm a grown adult with a job and a family and everything else, so I'm one of the guilty people of this. I bought it day one, still haven't played it. Because it's one of those
me
things
with most
like,
of my friends' games.
Support and then play later. And I was like, oh, I'll play it just in time for this recording. Nope, didn't have time.
Yeah, that's super common. Indie devs make jokes about that all the time, both just devs in general. But I think it's really interesting that coming off of the back of that, if what we had pitched and gotten funding for was El Paso Elsewhere 2, we wouldn't have had I Am Your Beast. We wouldn't have this vibrant environment where we can now make something like Clickolding. And because we instead did left turns and made games like Life Eater and Clickolding before I Am Your Beast, we've bought for ourselves this space where we can make anything at any size that we want and make the really strong, clear statement that our audience has bought into at this point, that we aren't trying to make the biggest game of all time. We're trying to make the next game you didn't know you needed. So the next project that we've talked about publicly is
I'm so jealous of this. You're going to steal my life if this is what I think you're about to mention.
Match 3 survival horror comedy RPG.
That's the one.
Yep. We got a Match 3 survival horror comedy RPG, and that's coming out next year. We got a co-op kaiju horror cooking game, and people are just throwing up their hands and going like, okay, Strange Scaffold just does what it does, and that means we don't need to make the 5-year bet. we can just keep making the decisions we think will result in better games for players. And that's part of the ecosystem. There are people who want to make blockbusters and have every project be bigger and bigger. And as long as they're transparent with themselves and their collaborators about that, they can take that risk and make those sets of developments. It's just like in games, the zero-sum way we talk about development of this is the right way or that is the right way. A bigger game is a better game, which we constantly see getting disproved all the time. That's the thing that part of the reason we've been so transparent is to combat that and also show the struggles we've experienced trying to live that out. I'll say honestly, part of the reason we almost had the doors closed is because I overextended myself. I was like, we can make things of multiple sizes. We can make them infinitely. We can make them in this real flexible creative environment. That overextension nearly cost us the ability to do it at all. Mm-hmm. So I just drill that into my head and remember it.
Right. So like we mentioned earlier, we recently played Clickolding for our game club where three of us and kind of the community at large plays the same game at the same time for an entire month. And then we kind of come together and we dissect it. Digging a little bit into Clickolding, what was really the kind of the influence in the background for creating Clickolding? Because it's such a unique game and such a kind of singular experience. What led you to, and you and the team, to dive into this and create Clickolding?
There's a wired oral history about Clickolding, which is a wild thing to say. But I can say the foundation of the project, the cauldron it bubbled out of, the place that I see it as is like a perfect expression of like Strange Scaffold as a microcosm. Thinking really, really deeply about constraints and what you're going to do and what you're not going to do on a project, what you're not going to even attempt in terms of creative intention or ambition, so that you can focus on the other stuff, and then just really committing to the bit, so much so that it's terrifying. So at this point, yeah, looking at Clickolding, I'm really proud of it for a variety of reasons, but I'd say one of the chief among them is that it's like, that is a project that could have basically only been made by us, made from an awareness of how we make things and how I want to bring games into the world. And that's exciting in a hellscape of late stage capitalism, to have that sense of personal agency when we're so often deprived of that in other places in our lives, professionally and otherwise. There's ways that we deal with those vagaries and compromises at Strange Scaffold even. But for the most part, we have a really expressive, intentional, creative environment.
Mm-hmm. And part of that with Clickolding, I'm assuming you go into this kind of game, or any game, with a feel, a vibe, a story that you want to tell. Obviously, there is a flip side of that where somebody who plays the game might take away something that you didn't intentionally put in there. Like when we played it, myself and Boston took two very completely different things away from it, but both were very valid, like, experiences and interpretations of the game. Like, how does
I will secretly tell you which one is correct after the podcast.
Okay.
Like, how does that affect you? Like, is it positive for you that people have different interpretations, or is it more of a stumpy feet, no, you didn't get it right kind of thing?
I think it is really just interesting. Like, it's the purpose of art. A lot of the inspirations of Strange Scaffold games even. So Creepy Redneck Dinosaur Mansion 3, the aforementioned
I'm so excited.
Survival horror
I'm so
RPG.
scared.
That emanated from me playing Puzzle Quest years ago and thinking, man, you have essentially an entire framework for expressing things that you do in an RPG, from lockpicking doors to convincing guards, and it's only used for combat. It's used for a few other things, a little puzzle here and there, but it's mainly just hitting dudes when that same exact match 3 scenario could be, again, trying to convince a guard, trying to lockpick a door, one of the things that we made in our internal proof of concept was there's a jewel thief, and you step into a room at the exact same time that the jewel thief comes in. And I don't think this will make it into the final game, but it was in our proof of concept. There's a big pile of diamonds on a table in front of both of you. And so your character starts gobbling down diamonds, and the entire match 3 encounter is you trying to eat as many diamonds as possible so that the other guy can't take them. And the fact that match 3 can express that and do that without having to, at the fidelity or the number of systems that would suggest for another indie game, really, really exciting. And that is all because of an interpretation I took from engaging with a piece of art. So, as a long answer to a short question, I love how human beings interpret things in different ways, but specifically how that inspires differing thought. And the idea that maybe 5-10 years from now, someone, based off of their experience with Clickolding, transmutes even their idea of what it should have been into a new project. That is what excites me creatively, because it means that we've made a contribution to this wider art form that we all love so much.
Right. Yeah.
Before we move into the lightning round questions here, as we sort of wrap up some of our Clickolding chat, we've already talked about the next couple of games for Strange Scaffold. Is there anything else on the horizon that you want to talk about? We've already talked about some stuff. There's been some post-launch support for I Am Your Beast. Is any of that stuff sort of influenced or sort of you feel like there's a different path because of how Clickolding was received, or how people sort of enjoyed or reviewed Clickolding?
I think we learned a lot making Clickolding. There's mistakes we made, especially in terms of process. It got very crunchy near the end, that we take as lessons and as places where I failed as a leader, and that I'll be using to adjust future creative production cycles. But I think first of all, there is I Am Your Beast updates coming along. There are ways that the lessons of Clickolding, in terms of how we want to make games, the life that we want to enable for our collaborators, how that comes together, those are invisibly now forming a hub of knowledge for the studio, as all of our projects do. And it's why we've learned so much in such a short time. It's because we made so many games. But alongside Creepy Redneck Dinosaur Mansion 3 and the Co-op Kaiju Horror Cooking game, we have a very big, very cool announcement, which hasn't come through yet, but you'll hear more about near the end of the year.
Okay.
And like all of our projects, I'd say one of the best things about working at Strange Scaffold is because all of these things are happening even in the periphery of other production cycles, even in things that we're doing in our day jobs. We get to take all those learnings and say, how do we make games better, faster, cheaper, and healthier? And I think the creative pitch and angle of our next few projects, including this big secret one, is a really good example of choose some constraints, choose a bit, and then commit to it.
I think you were a little bit harsh on yourself there, because you said you felt like you failed as a leader because Clickolding got a little crunchy towards the end. I think the key thing there is you seem to be a person who consistently learns and evolves and constantly changes and adapts to deal with whatever's next. I think you can only really call yourself a failure in that case if it happens again and again and again and again and again and again. I think one of the things I love about you on social media, on interviews, everything that you do, is you're so giddy and excited about everything that you're doing. And I think learning those lessons and taking it forwards, that doesn't mean it's a failure. It means it's a lesson. That's all it is. And seeing you go from step to step to step to step, and it's just like, okay, now he's talking about a match 3 dinosaur game. Like, when I saw your social media post about that, I was like, oh, I literally to myself, I was like, oh no, I love match 3. I put like something like 7,000 hours into Marvel Puzzle Quest, which is Puzzle Quest, but the Marvel version, and it was just like, I don't know if I can go down this hole again, but I will. I 1,000% will.
Right.
Because it's like, I like to see your twists and inversions on what's expected, what's standard, what's the quote-unquote usual thing that you do with a particular genre.
I appreciate that a lot, and I appreciate the kind words. I get so much credit for a lot of the cool creative things that we do, and a lot of the talk about sustainability. It's only fair that I cop to when it goes wrong, and in a lot of cases when it goes wrong, you just got to look at the person who's running the thing. And we exist in an environment at Strange Scaffold where it's really easy to fixate on me as a guy who knows what he's doing, guy who is a creative whatever. So yeah, I appreciate the kind words. I'm trying to learn all the time, but it's like, if I'm going to take the kind words, I'm also going to take, I'm trying to proactively claim and talk about the negative sides of it so other people can learn. Because one of the things I experienced coming into game dev is that every game development cycle was treated as inevitable. Like, man, BioShock was totally going to be a success, and you can tell it from the beginning, and it had all these razor sharp moments where it could have not become a success, but it happened. Treating everything as a Cinderella story or as acceptable sacrifices, rather than saying, this was really good, maybe even benefited from some of those sacrifices, but those sacrifices still happened, and you as a person have to determine your relationship with those sacrifices. Knowing how many of my friends worked on, say, BioShock Infinite. And I think BioShock
the
Infinite... The
crunchiest of games.
Crunchiest of games. My favorite in the series. I think it giving it... You can't give it that credit without also... I don't think it even is an asterisk. It's like, best in the series from especially a combat perspective, hurt a lot of people. They both exist in the same space. And Clickolding didn't hurt as many people, but like, it was rough. I broke the game 2 minutes before it came out.
Yeah, I remember hearing about this. It was very much a unlaunch kind of moment.
Launch, unlaunch is a thing that you got to learn from it. You hope you learn from it, and that's why I certainly hope.
Right. We got a couple minutes here before we're going to wrap this up. So we're going to do a couple quick lightning round questions. First off,
heck yeah.
Talk about our favorite games. So here at TVGP, we really love, and we say this with the utmost love, we love B games.
Complimentary.
Yeah, the most complimentary. We love B games. One of our favorite games of all time is Alpha Protocol. It's a wonderful game that has the sharpest of rough edges. It's a real diamond in the rough. We love those games so much. We want to ask you, what is your favorite B game, or maybe some of your favorite B games, and why have those games really resonated with you?
I think that B games resonate with me because they make such strong choices around their constraints. And when those constraints and considerations are holistic, they tend to produce beautiful, beautiful art, in my opinion. So things like, I remember Asura's Wrath and the discourse around it at launch of like too many QTEs. I'm playing it now for the first time. That game's breaking my mind open. It presents an entire... Because everyone talks about, a finger being shoved through the earth in that moment.
Yep.
But even more so than that, it presents an entire different paradigm for how you think about combat in a game like that. It isn't about clearing a room of enemies and then going to the next one. It is about fighting enough people efficiently enough that your dude gets angry enough to activate a set piece that massively changes the board in your context, which is something we haven't seen before and haven't really seen since. And it was something they got because they focused on QTEs and all these alternative ways of treating development.
I think that also does the wonderful thing of using unique visual prompts. I think it's a Asura's Wrath that does it where you have to hit like the B button as quick as you can, and then it just keeps popping up on the screen until the screen is full of B buttons, essentially. And it's great visual storytelling in a very unique way. Again, like you said, constrained to the type of game that it is.
Right.
Yeah, I have a deep affection for that. I have a deep affection for Beatdown Vengeance, which did the Street Fighter World Tour mode before Street Fighter by like 20 years, 15 years. Also made by Capcom, open world, janky, immersive sim thing. You can kill people permanently, and they stay off the board or use their individual skills when they're specifically traveling with you like a JRPG party to do specific mini games and unlock regions of the map.
Wow.
The PS2 era in particular, I think, because they were technology limited, has so many examples like that, where games didn't look the best or were not gleaming in every way gameplay wise, but they almost always did something in their structure and overall construction to communicate something. I just love to revisit that time because the concept of choices and what if you make someone mad can so rule a dev cycle. You don't figure out what it takes to make someone really, really, really happy. And that's where this is a weird thing for a B game, but I don't know if you've played Resident Evil 7 and also seen those reviews.
Yes.
But Resident Evil 7 is a game that got criticized for its structure. And when you look at Resident Evil 7 and where it was placed in the context of the series is kind of like at a low ebb after Resident Evil 6. People are wondering what's going to happen next with it. Resident Evil 7 and the way it's built in structure in a short form way. Huh?
I love that game. It's one of my favorite Resident Evil games.
Same here. And the thing that it does is that it never lets you do the traditional Resident Evil curve where you're scared and then you get a rocket launcher and then it's just a plateau.
Oh, sure.
Every time you would hit the plateau, it has a reset. And then you get all of your stuff and you're at where the plateau would typically be. And then you have to, light spoilers, race through an environment at high speed where you can't just use your high-powered kit to slowly pick off enemies one by one and just be overpowered. You're always being challenged to contextualize yourself in a different way, never allowed to get fully comfortable and always rewarded with new things in the process. And I was like, I can see why someone would criticize that. I don't just get to be powerful by the end. But if you ask yourself not what do I think it should be, but what is it doing, I think Resident Evil 7, especially if you compare it to Village, is the most structurally bold Resident Evil game we've seen to date.
Right.
Yeah.
What question or topic do you wish you'd get asked about more often? And selfishly, if you could answer it.
B games is actually one of them. I don't get asked about B games often. I get asked about development. I get asked about marginalization and diversity. I get asked about the studio's games. People don't let me talk about Beatdown Vengeance.
Right.
And that's for the best. Or Evil Within 2.
Right.
And that's for the best, but it's also for the worst. People don't ask me about ska. That's a problem. I'd say one of the biggest questions I don't usually get asked is, what is the thing that in your games that you are... It's a hard question to ask, which is why I get that people don't ask it, but most people don't ask, what is a way you chose to not to follow up a game? It's one of my favorite things to ask game devs when we're huddled around a table at GDC or something, because it reveals a lot of your creative priorities and what you consider important for your career. And I think one of the ones that I can talk about is in the wake of Space Warlord Organ Trading Simulator. We had an idea for making that multi-dimensional and making it to where you could switch between 4 different market boards at any time, because you were you had altered your brain to where you could trade across dimensions. So buy something from this dimension, sell it in another dimension where it will sell for higher.
Sure.
It is a game we could have built. It is a game that you can see in your head how building it might work and what the player appeal might be, even how you might build a trailer for it. But it didn't say or do enough new or that learned from our lessons on that project that I wanted to build it.
Right.
There are ways that I want to return to Space Warlord that I look forward to returning to it. But that specific one is like almost like an expansion pack, and for a game that says exactly, just kind of makes its exact statement about what it's doing and how it's doing it, and completed the statement, then it didn't make a lot of sense to me unless I was making a different statement to just say, and also other places.
Yeah. Right. Final question here. What question would you like to pass on to the next person that we interview? I haven't interviewed anybody in like 10 years, so I don't have someone to pass a question on to you, but what question would you like to pass on to the next person we interview to answer?
I'm honored that I'm the first person you've spoken to about like this in 10 years. I'd say the next question I would ask is, what do you wish you had done in your game, but are glad you didn't do?
Okay. Have you got an answer?
If I think about it, I'm sure I could come up with it, and I will reveal it along with the canon correct interpretation of Clickholding after.
There we go.
Okay.
All right. Well, that's all the questions we have. Thank you so much. Where can people find you online that you'd like them to follow both you and Strange Scaffold?
You can purchase I Am Your Beast on sale as part of the Difficult Games Bash today, and follow our portfolio of cool things through Strange Scaffold everywhere, strangescaffold.com. We have a newsletter, which we'll be doing stuff with soon. We have Discord. You can find me at Writ Nelson, WRIT Nelson, everywhere, and I'll probably do another absurd TikTok sometime later today.
There we go. All right, thank you so much.
By the way.
Right.
Oh, thank you.
All right, well, thank you so much for taking time out to chat with us, and hopefully everybody enjoyed it, and we'll talk to everybody again soon. Bye.
Thank you so much for having me.
Bye.